I don't even know how to start this. My hands are shaking just holding this pen, or maybe it's the years catching up with me. 79 winters in these bones, and still, when I close my eyes at night, I am 20 again, standing barefoot in that drafty farmhouse kitchen in Missouri, the smell of tobacco smoke curling through the boards, my heart breaking in ways I still can't explain. If you're listening to this, if you've stumbled onto my story, please, stay with me. Don't turn away. And if you can, give this old woman a like, maybe even subscribe, because I've held my tongue for nearly 60 years, and tonight, I just need someone to hear me. I grew up in Ozark County, Missouri, 1940s. Life was simple on the outside. Folks knew your name, you waved to neighbors at church, you canned peaches in summer, and you prayed the storms didn't take the roof in spring. But behind closed doors, things weren't always simple. My daddy was a farmer who worked the fields sunup to sundown, and Mama was the quiet type, always folding laundry, humming hymns under her breath. I married young. Too young, I suppose, but that's how it was back then. I was just 19, fresh out of high school, with cheeks red as apples and hair the color of wheat. He was Earl Whitfield, the boy from down the road, a good church-going man, or so I thought. Earl had soft hands for a farmer, always slicked back his hair with pomade, and when he smiled at me across the pews, I thought I'd been chosen. Isn't that what every girl wanted back then? To be chosen. We married in the summer of 1964, barefoot in the grass behind the little Baptist church. I remember thinking, this is it. My forever's beginning. But forever has a way of turning on you. We tried it for children. Lord knows we tried. Month after month, I'd sit by the window and cry, staring at other women pushing strollers past our gate, their babies wrapped in white blankets like angels. Earl would sit silent, jaw tight, and finally one night he said words I'll never forget. It ain't you, Maybelle. It's me. I can't give you one. And just like that, the dream of motherhood shriveled inside me. I was only 21, and I felt my body had failed, though it wasn't my fault. But in those days, you didn't talk about men being the reason. No, sir. Folks always looked at the woman, always whispered it must be her womb that was barren. I wanted to comfort Earl, to tell him love was enough. But he grew distant, drinking in the barn, leaving me alone in that creaking house with its cold floorboards and lonely nights. That's when his father, Henry Whitfield, stepped in. Henry was a towering man, the kind who filled up a doorway without trying. He was near 60 then, his hair gone silver at the temples, his boots heavy on the porch steps. Folks in town respected him, he was one of the wealthiest landowners in the county. But behind his eyes, there was something colder than river stone. At first, he'd sit with me at the kitchen table when Earl went out. Said he just wanted to keep me company. Asked about my cooking, my sewing, the way a man might ask about crops. But the way he looked at me, I felt stripped down to bone. I should have left then. I should have packed a bag and run to Mama's. But in those days, women didn't leave. You stayed, no matter what. The night everything broke was in the autumn of 1966. The air smelled of burning leaves, and I had just finished washing dishes. Earl sat in the corner, whiskey in his hand, eyes hollow. Henry stood behind me, his hand heavy on my shoulder, and Earl didn't move. He just watched. I can't tell you everything that happened. I don't want to paint those pictures for you. But I will tell you this, that night, I stopped being a wife. I stopped being a woman. I became something used, something taken, while the man I'd promised my life to sat and did nothing. 10 times, Henry came into my life in that way. 10 times, under that same roof, while Earl turned his face away. And I carried the weight of every single one. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you run? Why didn't you tell someone? Because in Missouri, back then, family business stayed in the family. And who would have believed me? A young farm wife with no children, accusing a respected landowner of stealing her womanhood? They would have laughed me out of town. Or worse, branded me the Jezebel. So I stayed. I cooked the meals. I folded Earl's shirts. I put on a smile at church while my inside screamed. And then, one winter morning, I realized I was late. My body whispered a truth I couldn't bear. I was carrying life, though not from love, not from choice. Because silence, my dears, silence is what kills us long before the years ever do. If you're still with me, bless you. Truly. It means more than you'll ever know. Because what I'm about to share now is the darkest chapter of my life, and I've carried it like a stone in my chest for over half a century. If you can, drop me a little note in the comments, or even a like, so I know this old voice isn't drifting out into emptiness. When I realized I was pregnant, I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, staring at the worn quilt Mama had sewn for me as a wedding gift. The sunlight crept across the floorboards, but it felt cold, like it was exposing me. Pregnant. A word that should have meant joy, but for me, it was nothing but chains. I told Earl that evening. He was sitting in the corner again, whiskey glass in hand, his shoulders slumped forward like a man twice his age. When I whispered, "Earl, I'm carrying," he lifted his head just enough for me to see the wet glint in his eyes. And then, he smiled. Not at me. Not at the thought of being a father. But to his father. I'll never forget that look that passed between them, like some twisted agreement had been sealed. My stomach turned, but I pressed my hands over it, as if I could shield the life inside me from the ugliness that surrounded us. The months crawled. My body swelled, my ankles ached, and yet no one in town suspected a thing. We told folks it was a miracle, that Earl and I had been blessed after years of trying. At church, women patted my belly, cooing, "God answers prayers." I wanted to scream. God hadn't answered my prayers. He had turned his face away. Every night I lay awake, listening to the house groan in the wind, wondering if the baby inside me would have Henry's eyes, Henry's hands, Henry's cruel mouth. I prayed it would take after me. Anything but him. The night the baby came, the storm outside shook the shutters loose. The midwife, Mrs. Turner, bustled in with her basket, smelling of peppermint and lye soap. Earl hovered in the corner, useless as ever, and Henry paced the hallway like he was waiting for a harvest. The pain was like fire ripping me apart. I screamed into the pillow, clutching at the sheets, until finally, I heard the cry. High and thin, like a bird caught in the rafters. Mrs. Turner smiled, wiping the baby clean. "A girl," she said, wrapping her in a blanket. "A girl." When she placed her in my arms, I wept. Her skin was soft as butter, her tiny fists curling against me. For a brief, fleeting moment, love bloomed in me, wild and uncontrollable. But then I looked into her face. And I saw him. Henry's eyes. That cold, steel-gray stare, staring back at me from a newborn's face. I wanted to love her. Lord knows, I tried. I sang lullabies into the night, rocked her until my arms went numb, whispered prayers over her tiny head. But every time those eyes blinked up at me, I felt myself shatter. Earl never once called her our daughter. He called her Pa's grandbaby. The way he said it, I knew he meant more. He held her like a borrowed thing, never close to his chest, never with tenderness. And Henry came by every day. He held her longer than he should, his rough hands cradling her as if she belonged to him in ways no one dared speak. I hated it. Hated him. But what could I do? I was trapped, a prisoner in that farmhouse, my voice stolen before it could ever rise. I thought about running. I thought about wrapping her in that quilt and walking the railroad tracks until I found freedom. But where would I go? Who would believe me? My own mama would have told me to endure. That's what women did back then, we endured. And so I endured. For 2 long years, I carried the weight of that secret, watching my daughter grow, watching Henry's shadow stretch over her life like a storm cloud. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. We'd just come back from church, the hymn still echoing in my head. I was peeling potatoes in the kitchen when I heard laughter in the parlor. Not the sweet laughter of a child, but Henry's low rumble. I peeked through the doorway and froze. Henry was bouncing her on his knee, his face far too close, his hand holding her too tightly. And Earl, my Earl, sat in the chair across the room, his eyes glassy, a small smile tugging at his lips like this was all some kind of twisted blessing. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I dropped the knife, rushed forward, and yanked her from Henry's arms. My voice, which had been silent for so long, tore out of me like a storm. You will not touch her again. The room went dead quiet. Henry's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. Earl just stared at me, mouth slack, as if I'd sprouted horns. I held my daughter so tight she cried, her tiny fists beating against my chest, but I didn't loosen my grip. For the first time, I didn't care what happened next. Whether they beat me, cast me out, or worse, I was ready to fight. After that day, something shifted. Henry stopped coming by as often. Earl grew colder, retreating into silence so deep I sometimes wondered if he even saw me anymore. But I didn't care. I poured all of myself into my daughter. I told myself, she will not be broken. She will not carry my scars. And yet, every night, I lay awake, wondering how long I could protect her. How long before Henry's shadow crept back in? How long before the truth came out and swallowed us whole? If you've stayed with me this far, I can't thank you enough. Truly, from the bottom of this old heart. You don't know how many nights I sat alone on the porch swing, rocking with the cicadas singing in the dark, thinking, when I die, all of this will die with me. But here you are, listening. And maybe that means it won't be buried after all. If you can, please leave me a like or a comment, even subscribe, because this is the part of the story where everything comes undone. I told you how I fought Henry off that Sunday afternoon, how I screamed for the first time in years. But one scream doesn't end a storm. Sometimes it just stirs it up. My little girl, whom I'll call Annie, grew fast. By the time she was 4, she had a laugh that could split the darkest cloud. She loved to chase chickens around the yard, her hair flying like dandelion fluff, her bare feet pounding the dirt. Every time she laughed, I felt alive again. But always, there was that shadow. Henry would come by with gifts, a doll, a ribbon, a peppermint stick, and I would stand stiff as a post, never letting her out of my sight. Earl never stopped him. Never once stood between us. He just watched. Always watched. The turning point came in 1970, when Annie was about 6. We were at a church picnic by the river, women gossiping over fried chicken and men smoking by the water. Annie was playing with the other children when Henry walked up, his boots sinking into the grass. He reached for her hand. I saw it from across the yard, and something inside me broke clean in two. I ran like my legs were 20 again, and snatched her hand away. Folks turned to look, their mouths hanging open, their paper plates drooping with coleslaw. "Don't you ever touch my child again," I shouted, my voice carrying clear over the river. The yard went silent. Henry's face darkened, but he smiled, oh, that cold, false smile, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well now, Maybelle, it seems you're forgetting your place." I thought my knees would give out, but I stood tall, Annie's hand clutched in mine. For the first time, the town saw a crack in the Whitfield family's perfect picture. That night, Earl came home drunk. He slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. "You humiliated him," he spat. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. My own wife, making a fool of my father in front of the whole town. I held Annie behind me like a shield. "He's not going near her again," I said, my voice steady though my insides trembled. And then Earl said the words that froze me. "She's his. Not mine." Hi. The room spun. I couldn't breathe. Earl knew. He'd always known. And he accepted it, welcomed it, even. That was the night I decided I couldn't stay. 2 weeks later, before the sun had risen, I packed a bag. A few clothes, a jar of coins I'd saved from sewing jobs, and Annie's favorite rag doll. I wrapped her in a quilt and carried her to the bus station in town. We rode through the morning fog, past the fields and the little white church, leaving Missouri behind like a ghost. I didn't tell anyone where we were going. Not Mama, not the neighbors, not even myself. I just knew we had to go. We ended up in St. Louis, in a crumbling apartment that smelled of mildew and coal dust. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I scrubbed floors, worked in diners, anything to keep food on the table. Annie grew up thinking her daddy had died young. I let her believe that. It was kinder than the truth. But secrets have a way of seeping through cracks. When Annie turned 16, she started asking questions. Why didn't we ever visit Missouri? Why didn't she have grandparents like her friends? Why did I flinch whenever she mentioned men? I tried to dodge, but one night she pressed me hard, tears shining in her eyes. "Mama, just tell me the truth. Who is my daddy?" And I broke. I told her enough, the bare bones of it. That her daddy wasn't the man I married, that he wasn't someone I chose, that he was someone who hurt me. I didn't give her his name. I couldn't bear to. Annie cried. She screamed. She called me a liar, said I was ashamed of her. For weeks, she wouldn't look at me. My heart cracked wider than I thought it could. But slowly, she came back to me. She understood, in her own way. And when she became a mother herself years later, she held my hand in the hospital and whispered, "You gave me life, Mama. That's enough." I never saw Earl or Henry again. I heard through the grapevine that Earl drank himself to death by 50, and Henry lived to a bitter old age, sitting on his porch with no one by his side. Some folks call that justice. I don't know. What I do know is this: silence is a poison. It eats at you, year by year, until there's nothing left but bones and shadows. I stayed silent for far too long. I let shame chain me down. But speaking now, even if it's to strangers on a screen, feels like prying those chains off, link by link. So, if you're still here, still listening to this trembling old voice, please, don't keep silent in your own life. If someone hurts you, if someone steals from you what cannot be returned, don't bury it in your chest like I did. Speak. Shout. Run, if you have to. And if my story has moved you, give it a like, share it, subscribe, so it doesn't vanish into the dark. Not because I need the attention, but because maybe, somewhere, another woman is sitting in silence tonight, thinking she's alone. You're not alone. I was broken, yes. But I lived. I raised my daughter. I found small joys in this hard life, sunsets on the porch, grandbaby's laughter, the feel of warm bread in my hands. And maybe that's what survival looks like. Not triumph, not glory. Just living. Just enduring. The room feels lighter now. My chest, though tired, no longer aches the way it did before I began. You see, stories are like locked chests. We carry them on our backs for years, heavy as stone, and sometimes we forget we even have the key. Tonight, after nearly 8 decades of silence, I finally turned that key. Why now? Because time has thinned me, worn me down to truth. Because the years ahead are fewer than the ones behind, and I cannot leave this world without placing my story gently into someone else's hands. Maybe yours. My life was a field once scorched, but I want you to know, wildflowers do grow from ash. Survival is not always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it is quiet, like breathing on a window pane, or the steady rocking of a cradle long after the child has fallen asleep. To those who have been hurt, who still carry the unspoken weight, you are not alone. Your silence does not make you weak, it makes you human. And when you are ready, when your own dawn comes, your voice will be the bird that sings the sky open. If this story touched you, please leave me a like, a word in the comments, maybe even subscribe. Not for me, this old woman has had her say, but for the next voice trembling in the dark, waiting to be heard. As for me, my name has been many things in this life: daughter, wife, mother, survivor. But tonight, as I close this chapter, I choose simply to be Maybelle again. And with that, I lay my story down like a seed in the soil, praying that when it blooms in kindness. Good night, my dear. The silence is over.